The survivalist manafin. A functioning society, a scratch on your forearm is an inconvenience. You wash it, apply a sterile bandage, and forget about it within an hour. But the moment the power grid fails and the supply trucks stop running, that minor abrasion transforms into a ticking time bomb. In a collapsed scenario, infection is the apex predator. It does not hunt you with claws or teeth. It consumes you from the cellular level outward. The era of cheap, readily available antibiotics has created a dangerous illusion of invincibility. For the last 80 years, humanity has slept soundly under a blanket of penicillin and tetracycline, forgetting that for the vast majority of human history, a simple infected tooth or a deep cut meant a slow, agonizing death. When the pharmacies are looted and the hospitals are turned into quarantine zones, the microscopic world will reclaim its dominance. Your immune system will be outgunned. The modern pharmaceutical industry has conditioned the population to view medicine as a synthesized white pill packaged in a sterile factory. This conditioning is a fatal trap. The pharmaceutical conglomerates operate on a business model of exclusivity and patent protection. They cannot patent a garlic clove or a ginger root, so they have spent decades systematically delegating natural medicine to the realm of folklore and pseudoscience. Profit margins dictate medical protocols, not survival efficacy. Consequently, the average citizen is completely illiterate regarding the chemical warfare that occurs in nature every single second. Plants have been fighting bacteria for hundreds of millions of years before humans discovered fire. Vegetation does not have an immune system of white blood cells to hunt down invaders. Instead, plants engage in chemical warfare, synthesizing volatile compounds to obliterate bacterial and fungal attacks instantly. To survive, you must stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a chemist. Esto. Understanding the enemy is the first step in dismantling it. Bacteria reproduce through binary fission, a process where a single cell divides into two identical cells. Under ideal conditions, this exponential growth means a single bacterium can become a colony of millions within hours. Once this colony reaches a critical mass, it releases toxins that damage your tissues and trigger a systemic inflammatory response known as sepsis. Sepsis is not a disease. It is your body destroying itself in a desperate attempt to kill the invader. Your blood pressure drops, your organs fail due to lack of oxygen, and you die. The goal of survival medicine is not to heal the wound. The goal is to disrupt this bacterial replication cycle before the colony achieves that critical mass. You do not need a prescription for this. You need to harness the same chemical weapons that plants use to defend their own cellular integrity. The most potent weapon available in a post-collapse environment is likely sitting in your kitchen right now, rotting in a dark corner. Allium sativum, commonly known as garlic, is not a flavoring agent. It is a biological weapon. However, the average person uses it incorrectly, rendering it medicinally useless. If you simply swallow a clove of garlic whole, you are wasting your time. The antibiotic power of garlic relies on a specific chemical reaction that only occurs under trauma. A whole clove contains a precursor amino acid called allicin and an enzyme called alliinase. These two components are kept separate in the plant's cell structure. You must crush the cell walls to activate the weapon. When you crush or chop the garlic, the allicin mixes with the alliinase, triggering an enzymatic reaction that produces allicin. Allicin is the compound responsible for garlic's pungent smell and its antimicrobial lethality. It operates by completely disabling the enzymes that bacteria need to survive. Specifically, allicin reacts with the thiol groups in bacterial enzymes, effectively shutting down their metabolic machinery. It starves the bacteria to death from the inside. This compound is effective against gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, including multi-drug-resistant strains like MRSA, which often survive modern hospital-grade antibiotics. But there is a critical tactical limitation you must understand. Allicin is highly unstable. Once generated, it begins to degrade immediately. If you cook the garlic, the heat denatures the alliinase enzyme, and the reaction never happens. If you let the crushed garlic sit for hours, the allicin oxidizes and loses its potency. To use this effectively, you must crush the clove, wait exactly 10 minutes for the maximum amount of allicin to synthesize, and then consume it raw immediately. If it does not burn your throat, it is not killing the bacteria. Moving beyond the kitchen, we must look to the raw power of the hive. Honey has been found in Egyptian tombs, perfectly preserved after 3,000 years. This is not an accident. Honey is the only food source that never spoils because it is an environment where bacteria cannot exist. Most people view honey as a sweetener, but in a survival scenario, raw, unprocessed honey is a supreme wound dressing. The mechanism here is twofold, involving both physics and chemistry. First, honey is hygroscopic. It has a low water activity, meaning it physically pulls moisture out of the environment. When applied to an infected wound, honey dehydrates the bacteria. It sucks the water out of the bacterial cells until they collapse. But the physical dehydration is only the first layer of defense. The true genius of the honeybee lies in an enzyme called glucose oxidase. When the bees regurgitate nectar to make honey, they add this enzyme. When honey interacts with the fluids from a wound, the glucose oxidase breaks down the glucose in the honey and produces a byproduct, hydrogen peroxide. This is a sustained-release chemical bombardment. Unlike the bottled hydrogen peroxide you buy at the store, which releases its oxygen instantly and damages healthy tissue, honey releases low levels of peroxide continuously over time. It cleans the wound without causing necrosis to the healing skin. Furthermore, raw honey, particularly darker varieties like Manuka, contains methyl glyoxal, a compound that penetrates bacterial biofilms. Biofilms are the shields bacteria build to protect themselves from antibiotics. Modern drugs often fail because they cannot breach this slime layer. Honey dissolves it. However, reliance on gathered supplies is finite. Eventually, the jars will run empty. You must look to the ground beneath your feet. The next category of defense involves identifying and utilizing the volatile oils found in specific herbs. We are not talking about brewing a gentle tea for relaxation. We are talking about extracting essential oils that function as solvents for bacterial cell membranes. Oregano is the heavy artillery of the herbal world. The active component in oil of oregano is carvacrol. In high concentrations, carvacrol is corrosive to the lipid bilayer of bacteria. The lipid bilayer is the skin of the cell. It holds the organism together. Carvacrol punctures this skin, causing the internal contents of the bacterium to leak out. The cell loses its structural integrity and bursts. Scientific studies have demonstrated that carvacrol is effective against Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Staphylococcus aureus, two of the most common and deadly pathogens in infected wounds. But you must exercise extreme caution. This is not a supplement. It is a caustic substance. Applying undiluted oregano oil directly to the skin will cause chemical burns, creating a new wound for bacteria to colonize. It must be diluted in a carrier oil, such as olive oil or coconut oil, to be safe for topical application. This brings us to a fundamental principle of survival pharmacology. Toxicity is determined by dosage. Everything that can kill a bacterium can also kill your own cells if used without precision. The margin for error in a world without emergency rooms is non-existent. While garlic, honey, and oregano provide a formidable triad of defense, they primarily address bacterial threats. But the biological landscape is filled with other terrors. Viral infections and fungal overgrowths will exploit the weakened state of a malnourished survivor. A simple case of athlete's foot in a wet, cold trench can lead to gangrene. To combat this, we must turn our attention to the preservation of the immune system itself. This requires a shift from offensive tactics to defensive fortification. The body requires raw materials to manufacture white blood cells. In a famine scenario, your immune system is the first system the body shuts down to conserve energy. You must force the body to keep the defenses online. One of the most overlooked resources in this regard is the pine tree. Pine needles are not just biomass, they are a concentrated source of vitamin C and shikimic acid. In the winter, when fresh fruit is a distant memory and scurvy begins to loosen your teeth, the evergreen forest is your pharmacy. Shikimic acid is the precursor used in the manufacturing of the antiviral drug Tamiflu. While drinking pine needle tea is not the same as taking a refined pharmaceutical, it provides the raw chemical building blocks your body needs to modulate the immune response. You are drinking the forest's antifreeze. The pine tree produces these compounds to survive freezing temperatures and constant assault from parasites. By consuming them, you are appropriating the tree's survival strategy for your own biology. But the forest offers more than just raw materials for immune modulation. It provides the mechanism for delivery. A potent antibiotic is useless if your circulatory system cannot transport it to the site of infection. In a state of shock or hypothermia, your blood vessels constrict, pulling blood to the core to preserve vital organs. This physiological response, known as vasoconstriction, leaves your extremities, the fingers, toes, and skin where most wounds occur, isolated and defenseless. To counter this, you need a circulatory stimulant. You need to force the vascular highways open. This brings us to the rhizome known as gingiber officinale, or ginger. While the culinary world treats ginger as a simple palate cleanser, the survivalist must view it as a bioenhancer. The active compounds, specifically gingerols and shogols, act as powerful vasodilators. When ingested, they relax the smooth muscle lining of the blood vessels, expanding the diameter of the arteries and increasing blood flow to the peripheral tissues. Ginger turns a dirt road into a superhighway. By combining ginger with natural antibiotics like garlic or honey, you are essentially ensuring that the payload reaches the target. Furthermore, ginger possesses its own intrinsic lethality against pathogens. It has been proven effective against Salmonella and Campylobacter, two of the primary bacterial agents responsible for dysentery and death in unsanitary water conditions. When the water filters fail and the sewage lines back up, ginger root becomes a critical barrier against fatal dehydration caused by gastrointestinal infection. However, possessing a powerful compound is meaningless if your body cannot absorb it. This is the concept of bioavailability, and it is the primary reason why most novice herbalists fail. A perfect example of this failure involves the use of turmeric. The active component in turmeric is curcumin, a substance with profound anti-inflammatory and antiseptic properties. It operates by inhibiting the NF-κB molecule, which travels into the nuclei of your cells and turns on genes related to inflammation. Curcumin effectively switches off the body's self-destruct signal. But there is a massive physiological flaw. Curcumin is poorly absorbed into the bloodstream. When you consume it, your liver identifies it as a foreign substance and immediately neutralizes it through a process called glucuronidation, flushing it out of your system before it can do any work. To bypass this metabolic firewall, you must employ a binary weapon strategy. You must combine turmeric with black pepper. Black pepper contains an alkaloid called piperine. Piperine inhibits the specific metabolic pathway in the liver that destroys curcumin. It distracts the liver, allowing the medicine to pass through the gates. Scientific data indicates that adding just a small amount of black pepper to turmeric increases the absorption of curcumin by 2,000%. This is not culinary advice, this is chemistry. Without the piperine catalyst, you are merely consuming expensive yellow dust. With it, you are ingesting a potent anti-inflammatory agent capable of rivaling pharmaceutical corticosteroids without the immune-suppressing side effects. Knowledge of chemical synergy is the difference between a placebo and a cure. While roots and spices offer systemic protection, we must address the immediate management of open trauma. The modern world has taught you to view the weed growing in the cracks of your driveway as a nuisance to be poisoned with herbicides. This is a grave error. Plantago major, commonly known as broadleaf plantain, is likely growing within 50 feet of your location right now. It is one of the most widespread plants on Earth, and for good reason. It is nature's bandage. The leaves contain a compound called allantoin, which stimulates cellular regeneration and tissue growth. But its primary value in a survival situation is its ability to draw out toxins and infection. When a wound becomes septic, or when a foreign object like a splinter or shard of glass is embedded deep in the tissue, the risk of tetanus and gangrene spikes. You cannot simply cover a dirty wound. You must purge it. A poultice made from chewed or mashed plantain leaves creates a chemical gradient. It softens the skin and draws purulence, pus, and foreign debris to the surface. It is an astringent, meaning it constricts body tissues to stop bleeding, while simultaneously acting as an antimicrobial agent. To use it, you must identify the plant by its distinct broad oval leaves with parallel veins running from the base to the tip. Mash the leaves into a paste to break the cell walls and release the allantoin. Apply it directly to the wound and bind it. Ignore the weeds at your own peril. Moving from solid matter to liquid extraction, we encounter the limitations of water. Most people assume that making a tea is the best way to extract medicinal compounds. This is false. Water is a polar solvent, meaning it only extracts water-soluble compounds. Many of the most potent antibiotic essential oils, alkaloids, and resins are hydrophobic. They hate water and will remain trapped inside the plant material if you only boil them. To access the full spectrum of a plant's arsenal, you need a stronger solvent. You need alcohol. The production of tinctures is a foundational skill for the post-collapse medic. A tincture is simply a plant extract dissolved in ethanol. High-proof alcohol, preferably vodka or grain alcohol that is at least 40% by volume, acts as a powerful solvent. It pulls the active chemicals out of the plant cells and preserves them indefinitely. A fresh garlic clove will rot in weeks. A garlic tincture will remain potent for years. The alcohol acts as a preservative, killing any bacteria that might try to consume the medicine. Alcohol is the time capsule that saves the chemistry for when you need it most. To create a tincture, you fill a jar halfway with your chosen medicinal plant, be it oregano, garlic, or echinacea, and cover it completely with alcohol. You seal it tight and store it in a cool, dark place. Darkness is essential because ultraviolet light degrades organic compounds. You must shake the jar daily for several weeks to facilitate the extraction process. This kinetic agitation ensures that the solvent circulates through the biomass. After a month, you strain out the solid plant matter, leaving behind a concentrated liquid that contains the genetic defense mechanisms of the plant, suspended in a sterile solution. This is your stockpile. When the SHTF event occurs, you will not have time to grow garlic or hunt for herbs. You will need immediate concentrated doses. A dropper full of a potent tincture is equivalent to cups of tea or handfuls of raw herbs. However, we must also confront the reality of fungal invasions. In a damp, grid-down scenario where hygiene is a luxury, fungal infections can incapacitate you just as effectively as bacteria. Candida and ringworm thrive on warm, moist skin. The pharmaceutical answer is clotrimazole. The survivalist answer is Juglans nigra, the black walnut. The hulls of the black walnut contain juglone, a naphthaquinone derivative that is toxic to many plants and fungi. Juglone is a chemical scorched earth policy. It is so potent that black walnut trees kill other plants growing near their roots to eliminate competition. By applying a tincture or wash made from black walnut hulls to a fungal infection, you are subjecting the fungus to this same herbicidal power. You are using the tree's territorial aggression to defend your own skin. While preventing the spread of infection is paramount, we must address the debilitating symptom that accompanies every major injury: pain. Pain is not merely a sensation. It is a physiological tax on your cognitive resources. When you are in agony, your ability to make rational, tactical decisions degrades. You become impulsive, irritable, and careless. In a survival situation, a lapse in judgment is just as lethal as a bullet. The modern world relies on synthetic opioids and NSAIDs like ibuprofen, stocks of which will be depleted within the first weeks of a supply chain collapse. Once the bottles are empty, you must turn to the chemistry of the Salix genus, the willow tree. The bark of the white willow contains salicin, a glucoside that is chemically similar to aspirin. In fact, it is the historical precursor from which Bayer synthesized acetylsalicylic acid in the late 19th century. However, the mechanism of action requires your body's metabolic intervention. The tree does not give you aspirin, it gives you the raw code. When you ingest a decoction of willow bark, your gut flora and liver enzymes convert the salicin into salicylic acid. This compound acts by inhibiting the production of prostaglandins, lipid compounds that signal pain and inflammation to the brain. By suppressing these chemical messengers, you are effectively jamming the enemy's communication lines, but you must understand the difference between an infusion and a decoction. Steeping the bark in hot water like a tea bag is insufficient. Bark is dense, woody material with rigid cellulose structures. To extract the salicin, you must boil the bark aggressively. A sustained boil of at least 20 minutes is required to break down the cellular matrix and release the medicinal compounds into the water. Furthermore, salicylic acid is a blood thinner. In a trauma situation where hemorrhage is a risk, using willow bark can accelerate blood loss. You must weigh the benefit of pain relief against the risk of bleeding out. Survival medicine is a constant calculation of risk versus reward. Beyond plants and herbs, we must consider the chemical environment of the body itself. Pathogenic bacteria generally thrive in a specific pH range, usually close to neutral. If you alter the battlefield, you handicap the enemy. This brings us to the utility of acetic acid, found in simple apple cider vinegar. While the health and wellness industry markets this as a weight loss miracle, the survivalist values it for its acidity. Acetic acid is a disruptor. It penetrates the cell membranes of bacteria and lowers their internal pH, causing the proteins inside the cell to unfold and lose function. This process, known as denaturation, is irreversible. You are essentially pickling the bacteria alive. Apple cider vinegar is particularly effective against biofilms. As previously mentioned, bacteria secrete a slimy extracellular matrix to protect themselves from threats. This slime makes them up to 1,000 times more resistant to antibiotics. Acetic acid dissolves this matrix. It strips away the armor, leaving the bacteria exposed to your immune system or other antimicrobial agents you are deploying. Furthermore, in a world without refrigeration, preserving food becomes a matter of life and death. Fermentation is the controlled spoilage of food by beneficial bacteria to prevent lethal spoilage by pathogens. By mastering the production of vinegar, you not only create a potent disinfectant and antibiotic potentiator, but you also secure a method to preserve calories for the winter. However, there will be scenarios where biological agents, plants, fungi, and enzymes are not enough. There will be infections that laugh at garlic and ignore oregano. In these desperate moments, you must turn to inorganic chemistry. You must turn to the heavy metals. Silver is the nuclear option of natural antibiotics. Before the discovery of penicillin, colloidal silver was a standard medical treatment. It operates on the principle of the oligodynamic effect, a toxic effect of metal ions on living cells, algae, molds, spores, fungi, viruses, and bacteria. This is not herbalism, this is physics. When silver particles are suspended in a liquid, they release silver ions. These positively charged ions are attracted to the negatively charged cell walls of bacteria. Upon contact, the silver ions punch holes in the membrane, causing the bacterial cytoplasm to leak out. But the destruction goes deeper. The silver ions penetrate the cell and bind to the DNA, freezing the replication mechanism. The bacterium cannot divide. It cannot repair itself. It shuts down completely. This mechanism is so effective because it attacks multiple targets simultaneously, making it incredibly difficult for bacteria to develop resistance. The danger lies in the quality of the production. You cannot simply grind up a silver coin and swallow it. You need a colloidal generator, which utilizes the process of electrolysis. By placing two pure silver wires in distilled water and running a direct current through them, using standard 9-volt batteries, you can strip microscopic particles of silver off the wire and suspend them in the water. You are manufacturing a heavy metal antibiotic solution using basic electricity. But here is the brutal reality regarding toxicity. Silver is a heavy metal. Your body has no efficient way to excrete it. If you consume high concentrations of large silver particles over a long period, the silver deposits in your skin and organs, turning you permanently blue-gray. This condition, known as argyria, is irreversible. You will look like a walking corpse for the rest of your life. Therefore, colloidal silver is not a daily supplement. It is a tactical weapon to be used only when the infection is systemic and unresponsive to biological treatments. You use it to save your life, not to boost your general health. In a collapse scenario, cosmetic side effects are irrelevant compared to the alternative of septic shock. We must also address the inevitable consequence of waging chemical warfare on your own body. Whether you use pharmaceutical antibiotics, raw garlic, or colloidal silver, you are engaging in a scorched earth campaign. Antibiotics are indiscriminate killers. They do not distinguish between the staphylococcus trying to kill you and the lactobacillus required for your digestion. After a course of potent natural antibiotics, your gut microbiome will be a wasteland. Without a healthy gut, you cannot absorb nutrients from the meager food supplies you have managed to scavenge. Malnutrition will set in, weakening your immune system and inviting the next infection. The cycle of survival requires a strategy for reconstruction. You must reseed the gut. This is where the wild fermentation of carbohydrates becomes critical. Sauerkraut, kimchi, and other fermented vegetables are not just food. They are biobanks of beneficial bacteria. You are consuming a reinforcement army. The lactic acid bacteria produced during fermentation lowers the pH of your gut, making it hospitable for good bacteria and hostile to pathogens. In a sterile, dead world, your digestive tract must remain a thriving ecosystem. If you kill the infection but starve to death because your gut cannot process food, you have achieved a Pyrrhic victory. Moving away from the biological agents found in the forest and garden, we must address the most abundant chemical compound available to the coastal or scavenging survivor, sodium chloride. Salt is not a seasoning, it is a desiccant. In the history of warfare, long before sterile gauze and iodine, salt was the primary method for preserving meat and treating wounds. The mechanism here is purely physical, governed by the laws of osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water across a semi-permeable membrane from an area of low solute concentration to an area of high solute concentration. When you apply a hypertonic saline solution, water with a high concentration of salt, to an infected wound, you are creating a lethal environment for bacteria. The cells of bacteria are filled with water. When they encounter the salt-heavy environment, the laws of physics demand that the water inside the bacterial cell rush out to dilute the salt outside. This process is called plasmolysis. You are literally sucking the life force out of the pathogen. The bacterial cell membrane detaches from the cell wall, the internal structure collapses, and the organism dies from dehydration. This is effective against a broad spectrum of microbes. However, there is a brutal trade-off. Salt does not distinguish between a bacterial cell and your own healthy skin cells. Packing a wound with salt is excruciatingly painful and will damage regenerating tissue. It is a scorched earth tactic. It should be reserved for initial cleansing of heavily contaminated wounds or for infections where no other option exists. In a survival scenario, the pain is irrelevant. The prevention of gangrene is the only metric that matters. While external threats are visible and manageable, internal threats are silent assassins. In a post-collapse world, food safety standards vanish. You will be eating questionable meat, scavenged canned goods, and wild plants. Food poisoning and dysentery will become leading causes of death. When you ingest a toxin, your body's natural reaction is to purge through vomiting and diarrhea, which leads to fatal dehydration. To stop this, you need a binder. You need activated charcoal. This is not the briquettes you use for a barbecue, which are laden with toxic petrochemicals. This is carbonized wood that has been processed to maximize its surface area. The scientific principle at work here is adsorption, which is distinct from absorption. Absorption is like a sponge soaking up water. Adsorption is like a magnet. Charcoal carries a negative electrical charge. Most organic toxins and poisons carry a positive charge. When activated charcoal enters your digestive tract, it attracts these positively charged toxins. They bind to the surface of the charcoal particles and are trapped. Because the body cannot digest charcoal, it passes through the system, carrying the bound toxins out with it. A single gram of activated charcoal has a surface area in excess of 500 square meters due to its microscopic pore structure. You are swallowing a massive filtration system. To manufacture this, you must burn hardwood, willow, oak, or coconut shells in a low-oxygen environment to create charcoal. Then, to activate it and increase the surface area, you must expose it to high temperatures and an activating agent like calcium chloride or lemon juice, though even simple crushed charcoal from a clean hardwood fire is far better than nothing. This is the universal antidote. It is effective against bacterial toxins, plant poisons, and heavy metals. However, it is indiscriminate. It will also absorb any medications or nutrients you have taken. Timing is critical. You must administer it immediately after toxin ingestion, but separate it from food or other life-saving drugs by at least 2 hours. Now we must descend into the most repulsive yet scientifically sound corner of survival medicine. When necrosis sets in, you need a biological scalpel. In a sterile hospital, surgeons use steel instruments to cut away dead, rotting tissue in a process called debridement. If you do not remove dead tissue, it becomes a breeding ground for fatal anaerobic bacteria like Clostridium perfringens, which causes gas gangrene. In a bunker or a forest, you do not have the surgical skill or the sterile environment to cut out rotting flesh without causing sepsis. You must outsource the labor to the larvae of the green bottlefly, Lucilia sericata. This is known as maggot debridement therapy. It was used extensively during the American Civil War and World War I before the advent of penicillin. The specific genius of these larvae lies in their digestive enzymes. They secrete proteolytic enzymes that dissolve necrotic, dead tissue into a semi-liquid soup which they then consume. They are programmed by evolution to only eat death. They will not touch healthy, living tissue. In addition to cleaning the wound, their secretions contain antimicrobial peptides like lucifensin, which actively kill bacteria, including MRSA. They also raise the pH of the wound, inhibiting bacterial growth. However, this technique requires extreme knowledge and identification skills. You cannot simply let any fly land on your wound. Some species, like the screwworm fly, feed on living tissue and will eat you alive. Misidentification is a death sentence. You must be able to identify the metallic green sheen of the Lucilia species. If you can harness this biological workforce, you have a self-replicating surgical team that operates 24 hours a day, cleaning wounds with a precision that no human hand can match. It is a test of your psychological resolve. Can you watch yourself being eaten to survive? If the answer is no, you are not ready for the reality of the collapse. Finally, we must look to the sky. The sun is a nuclear reactor that bombards our planet with radiation. While the atmosphere protects us from the most lethal rays, enough ultraviolet A radiation penetrates to serve as a disinfectant. This is the principle behind solar water disinfection, or SODIS. UVA radiation interferes with the DNA of bacteria and viruses in water. It also reacts with dissolved oxygen in the water to produce highly reactive forms of oxygen, such as hydrogen peroxide and free radicals. The sun turns the water into a weapon against its own contaminants. To utilize this, you need clear PET plastic bottles. Glass blocks too much UV radiation, and colored plastic is useless. You fill the bottle with water, leaving a small air pocket, and shake it for 20 seconds to oxygenate the fluid. Then, you lay the bottle horizontally in direct sunlight. The horizontal position maximizes the surface area exposed to the radiation. In bright sunlight, 6 hours is sufficient to kill parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, as well as bacteria like E. coli. On a cloudy day, it requires 2 days. This method relies on no chemicals, no filters, and no fuel for boiling. It relies on the immutable laws of radiation physics. It is slow, but it is inexhaustible. As long as the sun rises, you have a method to sterilize your hydration source. The common thread connecting salt, charcoal, maggots, and solar radiation is that they require no industrial supply chain. They are elemental. The pharmacy of the future is not a building with glass windows and air conditioning. The pharmacy of the future is the earth, the sun, and the biological scavengers that clean it. The system has trained you to be helpless without a prescription pad. It has dulled your instincts and blinded you to the chemical reality of the world around you. By reclaiming this knowledge, you are cutting the strings of dependency. You are transitioning from a consumer who waits for rescue to a survivor who engineers their own salvation. The greatest threat to your survival is not a marauder with a rifle. It is the invisible film of fecal matter on your own hands. Dysentery and typhus have killed more soldiers than gunpowder. In a collapsed society, the modern consumer relies on finite bottles of antibacterial gel, which will vanish in days. To survive, you must master the chemistry of saponification. A virus is essentially a genetic code wrapped in a lipid envelope, a layer of fat. Water alone cannot remove it because oil and water do not mix. Soap is not a cleaning agent, it is a molecular crowbar. The soap molecule is an amphiphile. One end loves water, while the other end burrows into the fatty shell of the virus. When you rinse, the mechanical tension rips the virus apart. The ingredients for this chemical weapon are in your fire pit and your dinner. You need wood ash and animal fat. By leaching water through hardwood ash, you create lye, or potassium hydroxide. This is a caustic base. When you mix this dangerous liquid with rendered animal fat, or tallow, and apply heat, a reaction occurs. The triglycerides in the fat react with the hydroxide to produce soap. You are transmuting waste products into the foundation of public health. Without this reaction, surgery is suicide and hygiene is impossible. We have traversed the spectrum from the volatile oils of oregano to the heavy metal ions of silver. The pharmaceutical industry has built an empire on the concept of synthesized exclusivity, convincing you that health is a product to be bought. The medical conglomerates have created a society of biological dependence. This dependency is a death trap. When the supply trucks stop, the countdown begins. The diabetic has weeks, the person with a septic tooth has days. By internalizing this manifesto, you understand that the world is a vast, open-source chemical laboratory. The pine forest is a vitamin factory and the sun is a radiation sterilization unit. Nature does not have a supply chain problem. The era of cheap, easy medicine is drawing to a close. The pharmacy is closed. You are now the doctor, the chemist, and the surgeon. Look at the weeds cracking through the pavement. They are not just plants. They are your arsenal.